Herbs are easy plants to grow in Oklahoma, and you can very quickly get more of them than you can use at one time. So many of us will grow herbs in the garden very successfully, and maybe through the summer just use a little snippet here and there in salads or in baking, and the rest possibly go to waste. Well, I want to show you the right time to harvest these herbs and how to process them so you get the most benefit from those plants that you take the time to grow. Right here we have some Greek oregano. Greek oregano is used a lot in Italian cooking. It can be dried or frozen. Drying's probably easier though. And you can harvest oregano most any time during the summer, but the flavor is best just before bloom. These are just starting to make tiny little buds at the very tip of them. So I'm just going to go through and snip back some. I won't take all of it today. And then I'll just bundle this together with a rubber band and get it ready for drying. Now thyme, we have both creeping thyme and regular upright thyme. Thyme is very bad about getting woody stems in it, and so you need to keep after it all summer long and just take little snips. In fact, I've known some people to cut it back quite hard and it does sprout back again. But it is one that you don't want to let get too tall because you will get a lot of woody growth. Thyme dries very, very well. In fact, you want to just leave the stems intact and spread them out on a sheet somewhere. It has very pungent odor, and this is one that keeps real well, up to a year, and it will preserve its flavor. Now, sage, really, for the best scent in it, the oils are at their highest just before bloom. We went ahead and let our sage bloom because the blossoms are beautiful and the honeybees just love it. We'll probably go ahead and let most of this finish blooming, but we won't let it go to seed. But we'll let the bees get the full benefit. If you want to harvest sage, though, you can just cut some of those blooms off. They dry nicely if you want to use them in wreaths. A lot of people grow sage just for that. So we'll collect some of that for drying. And then we'll collect some of the stems. The sage is a plant, again, that you don't want to allow to get too woody. In here is an older woody stem versus some of these newer shoots. And the woodier stems tend to become less productive. They produce fewer nice lush leaves. Sage is also a plant that dries very, very well and keeps well. And when you go to buy it in the market, a lot of times it'll be referred to as ground rubbed sage. And that just means it's been ground to a powder and rubbed through a sieve. But you can just dry it and crumble it up real well. And around here is another herb that dries very, very well, and that's rosemary. Rosemary is an interesting plant. Researchers at Rutgers University in the past few years have done a lot of work on it, and they have found that it contains a property that prevents grease and oils from oxidizing. And so it's been very useful in preserving fried foods without using chemical preservatives. So it could be someday if you buy a sack of potato chips, you'll find that rosemary has been used as an antioxidant or as a preservative. Now when you're harvesting rosemary, only take little cuttings that are no more than 4 inches tall. And when you harvest rosemary, don't ever cut more than 20% of the plant back or you'll weaken it too much. So I'm just going to take a few of the more vigorous shoots off. For today, and then we'll dry that. Nice thing about rosemary is when it dries, you can just take it and strip the leaves off the stem and then store them in an airtight container. The next herbs I want to show you are really better if you freeze them. Right here is our peppermint. Notice we're growing it in a container, and we're much happier with it this way this year. It's not taking over our herb garden. Peppermint can be harvested all year long, and it benefits from being cut back hard because it will induce side shoot production and help us to have a healthier plant. One thing you want to watch out for in peppermint is it can get a fungus called rust. And we don't recommend any fungicide treatments for that, but if you do get rust in your plants, just cut it back to new foliage. And as the new growth comes out, it'll be better off. This mint will spring back and grow quite well for us. The mint can be used in jellies, in teas. It's very good in fruit salads as a complement, so you might try it that way. Now, some of these more tender herbs that I say are more ideally suited for freezing, their foliage tends to bruise, so you want to be fairly gentle when you handle them for harvest time. And the best way to process mint is just to bundle it up, rinse it in ice cold water, and then take the individual leaves off and put them out on a tray and pop them in the freezer. Every herb has an ideal time for harvest, and the dill is not quite yet ready. Dill has two uses. We use the leaves to put in herb butters, salads, and whatnot. The seed heads are used for pickling. And dill oil in the leaves is at its peak just before dill starts to bloom. So I'm not going to pick any of this today. I want to wait for those flower heads to form. And then later this summer, I'll show you how to harvest the seeds for pickling. Now, chives are best frozen. A lot of people have dried chives and been disappointed because the flavor does just not come through. So either use them fresh or use them frozen. The best way to harvest chives is to take leaves from the outer part of the clump, cut right down near the base. And you can't hurt the plant, just leave enough in the center to regrow. You can also harvest those blossoms. I'll show you later on how you can use those in the kitchen. Last of all, we have tarragon. Tarragon is another one. The oils are very, very volatile. Drying, the flavor does not come through very well. You can harvest tarragon any time through the summer. In fact, it benefits from being cut back. But just be sure that you get it prepared for freezing right away and handle that foliage gently. It bruises very easily. Well, let's take these to the kitchen and I'll show you how to put them up for the summer. The first step in getting herbs ready for freezing or drying is to rinse them in cold water. That'll get any dust off of them. Next step is to just daub them dry with a paper towel. And right here I have some chives and some fresh tarragon from the garden. And as I mentioned, both of those are better frozen than they are dried. The flavor is much better. To get the chives ready, just line them up with a knife. Cut them into small pieces. If you have a few yellowed stems, you can pull those out. And what you want to have ready after you get these cut up is a bag, plastic bag of freezer weight plastic, and have it all labeled with the name and the date on it. This one says Chives, May '89, and you just pack those in there. And they're all ready for the freezer. The chives do fine if you just pop them in a bag like this and seal them up. Tarragon, on the other hand, is a little different. It's probably a good idea to put it on some kind of a cookie sheet to dry. And the way you prepare that is just take off the smaller stems, just pull those off of the rather thick stems. Most tarragon that you use will be a matter of just laying a little sprig on a piece of fish or placing it into salad dressing or something. So if it's still on the stalks, that's just fine. And when you're handling tarragon, be careful. It does bruise easily. And it doesn't really matter that you have a great big tray, but just space it around there. That way it won't stick together quite so much. Okay. You might want to use the more tender shoots. Again, tarragon can be harvested several times during the season. There we go. Okay. Now all you do on these is just stick them in the freezer for several hours. Keep in mind, sometimes when you spread herbs out on a cookie sheet, when you take them out of the freezer, just sack them up, they may be stuck to it. Don't try to pull them away with your hands because they'll begin defrosting very, very quickly. Just use a spatula. Again, put them into a plastic freezer weight bag, label and date them. And when you put herbs into a bag, it's a good idea to get as much air out as possible to avoid freezer burn. And just put those in the freezer. The chives are ready to go, and the tarragon will be soon. Now these are some chives that I froze a couple of days ago. I'm going to show you how nicely they turned out. And contrast that with some that were dried, and you can see a real difference in the visual quality of these. And these chives will have much better flavor than the dried ones. Now with the handling frozen herbs is a little different than dried ones. Dried ones, as long as you get them dried down and get all the moisture out, it's pretty carefree the way you use them. You can use them in fresh products or frozen. With the frozen herbs, the thing you have to be careful about is that the ones with the broader leaves, such as some mint here, once it's taken out of the freezer, it will immediately start to turn black, similar to trees that have been frosted or frozen on a winter morning, if they have any leaves that are exposed. And so if you're using broadleaf herbs that have been frozen, they will have fresher flavor, but they won't have very good visual quality. So make sure that you immediately take them out of the freezer and put them into sauces or stews or some processed form. You won't want to put this into a fruit salad, for instance. So just keep that in mind when you're processing herbs. Now, if you're going to dry some herbs, there are several methods that you can use. This is some sage that I stripped off of the stem and just laid on an old window screen. And over the weekend, I had my car parked in front of the house. I knew I wasn't going to drive that car, so I just set these in the back window. It was warm and dry, a perfect place. The car smelled good and the sage dried down quickly. When you're drying herbs, make sure that you dry them to the point that they're very crispy so that you can put them into jars. And it's a good idea if you store the dried herbs as whole as possible. They'll hold their flavor longer. The trick is, though, to make sure that that leaf is entirely dry. So whatever you put on the screen, make sure you strip it off properly. This is some oregano that I just took out of the garden. If I wanted to dry that on a window screen, again, I would put it into cold water, rinse it thoroughly, daub it off, and then pull the leaves off and lay them on the screen to dry. Now, a quicker method to dry herbs is to use the microwave. These are some sprigs of thyme that I pulled out of the garden and put on 2 sheets of paper towels. They were rinsed first. Put on 2 sheets of paper towels, dried them in the microwave for about 3 minutes on high power, again until they're crispy dry. And you can test them. Some herbs that have larger, broader leaves may take longer than that. But it's a really good, very quick method. Your kitchen will smell real good for a short while too. Those again can just be put in jars, labeled, and stored in a cool, dry place. Now the original method for drying herbs was to put them on a drying rack. And I've just rigged one up here on a cane pole. These were gathered together, rinsed in cold water, and then bundled together with a rubber band and just hung up here about 5 days ago. Again, use your imagination for rigging up a drying rack. I just have some old coat hangers here. That works just fine. I have some sage from the garden, some oregano right here. That needs a few more days yet. If it's not just crispy, crumbly, dry to the touch, it's not ready yet. Over here is some rosemary. And on drying herbs, if you're not very familiar with what herbs look like in the fresh form, you're certainly not going to recognize them when they're dry. So you might want to label them. Also, if you're drying them outdoors, on a porch or someplace like that, a warm, dry place is ideal, but they may get dusty in the process. And if they have to hang up there for a week or two, it'll be very hard to get them clean once they're already dried off. In fact, you won't want to re-wet them. So put a paper sack around them if you want to, punch a few holes in it so it'll keep the dust off but be well aerated, and label the sack. I've got some dried mint here, which probably will be easier to use in teas than that frozen mint that I showed you, and again some dried sage. And that's really a very easy way to dry them. Now, a lot of home magazines show very pretty pictures of country kitchens with herbs hanging from the ceiling. That's just a temporary situation. You don't want to leave them hanging up there for months at a time because they will not keep very well. If we get humid weather, they'll start to take moisture back on again, begin to mildew, and they won't be very usable. So again, this is just for about a week or two. Now, when you're storing dried herbs, make sure, again, that you label them, put the date on there, and only keep them for 1 year. If you're like I am, you have a spice rack in your kitchen where you have herbs that probably have been there for 3, 4, maybe 5 years because you probably paid a lot of money for them at the store and want to use them all up. But the quality probably really has gone downhill. Store dried herbs in a cool, dry place. By all means, don't put them on the back of the stove. And 1 year really is about the maximum. Now, if you're putting herbs in a jar, seal it up tightly. Check that after a week. If you start to see some condensation inside the jar, take them out, try to dry them down some more because they will mildew. Now, another way that you can process herbs is to preserve them in a liquid form, either in vinegar or in oil. Now, this is some chive vinegar that I made about 4 days ago. I just took some fresh chive blossoms and dropped them down in the vinegar. You can heat up the vinegar on the stove and pour that over the herbs, such as chives or tarragon. Leave the lid off and let it cool down and then store it, and it should keep quite well. You don't want to take the vinegar all the way to the boiling point, though. But you can see the chive blossoms make a nice pink color, and it has a very, very mild onion aroma to it, so it's great with vinegar and oil in salads. Now, last summer we visited some chefs in Tulsa, and we showed you how to make herbal oils. And this one was one that Philippe Garmy showed us how to make. He simply took a clean glass jar and in it put fresh peppercorns, chili peppers, some garlic, bay leaf, a bit of rosemary, some tarragon, and then poured olive oil over it. Remember, if you're going to do this, it needs to marinate for about 6 weeks in a cool, dry place, and then just store it in the refrigerator, and it should keep for several months. I've been using this for months now. It's delicious in Italian sauces, on pasta by itself, or with a vinegar on a salad. You'll find as many uses for it as you have imagination. Now, if you're using fresh herbs in recipes, keep track of whether that recipe calls for dried herbs or fresh herbs. If you're using fresh mint, for instance, and it calls for 1 tablespoon in the recipe, that's fine, go ahead and use 1 tablespoon. But if all you have on hand is dried mint, cut that to 1 teaspoon. Just remember the basic formula on herb recipes is 1 tablespoon of fresh or frozen herbs equals 1 teaspoon of dried herbs. Well, have fun processing all of your herbs. Use them in vinegars or oils, or dry them or freeze them. Remember to use some common sense. Make sure those dried ones are dried down completely so you don't have moldy herbs a couple months from now when you go to open them up. And enjoy making these up for gifts for friends, possibly for the holidays coming up.